like I have DACA for 2 years. I don't know what's going to happen, especially as we went through a very, and continue to go through a very
Yeah.
turbulent time with the security around DACA, is that it's a temporal thing. And so that, for one, I had to go through a personal mental health, kind of reassuring myself that that wasn't what I needed to hold myself to every time, because it would freak me out to think, I'm going to run out after 2 years, it's
Yeah.
over. I kept pressuring myself to do more and more and more. And while that hope, catalyzed a lot of what I've done, it was not sustainable. And I think it's a matter of being real with ourselves and realizing that if we're going to do something, we need to understand that, we have to do it in a sustainable manner. And one of the things that I've taken with that is, with that pressure, did lead me to think, if I do get, deported or I lose DACA, how can I continue to work, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that makes sense for my family, getting that financial security. And what clicked in my head was, if I can get into development, software development, all I need is a computer and an internet connection.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Leo Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Munoz, and today we'll be speaking with Oscar Romero Jorge, a first-gen immigrant and a passionate software engineer. He is a DACAmented Mexican American and an activist for equity and inclusion. He graduated from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte with a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics and a minor in Computer Engineering. Oscar has worked on numerous projects such as Votemos North Carolina, a bilingual space for Latinx community to get information about elections and voting, Google Drive and Docs API integration, WordPress authentication, as well as started a blog titled My Undocu Life about life as an undocumented individual in the United States. Let's get right into it, and I hope you love the episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Welcome to the Leo Podcast, Oscar. We're here to talk about your journey to becoming, a senior software engineer as an undocumented individual. So let's just get right into it. I want to start from the beginning and just tell us where you're from and your journey to the United States.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on here, Kevin. It's super exciting. I've been following a little bit, so always love seeing the posts. And my backstory, I guess, taking it back to the 90s, now that I think about kind of those years and decades, it's fascinating to think, wow, quite a lot has transpired since then. Very reflectionate on it, but, I was born in a small little kind of, I guess, what would be considered, I guess, suburb of Mexico City, called Jardines de Santa Clara. And
Okay.
I look at it on Google Maps a lot because, unfortunately, can't go back right now, but
I do that too with my, like, where I was born.
It's so, I don't know what it is. It's kind of, I guess, nostalgic. Or just imagine, like,
Yeah.
what would have life been look like,
Right.
being there. Yeah, I actually did it this past this week, and I was just kind of looking at it, and seeing kind of what's around there, what restaurants are there, kind of seeing what shops are like. But so that's, being born in the 90s, and then 4 years into my life, I guess right at 3.5. At that point, my dad had been coming to the States under tobacco work, contractually to the U.S. under work visa.
Okay.
Saw the opportunity available out here, and so we immigrated to the States through El Paso, Texas. We were waiting for him to finish up his final year, and so we stayed very shortly up in Illinois, in a small town there. I can't remember the name right now, but we stayed there. Then when dad finished up in North Carolina, where there's a lot of tobacco field work, he was working there, came up, and he was doing a little bit of construction and carpentry work up there. But Chicago area, even though we were like an hour outside of it, is still kind of expensive comparatively to North Carolina, at least what he was used to. And so he thought it was best to come down to North Carolina at the time. And so we came down to North Carolina in the early 2000, I think 99, 2000 or so. And so we settled out here in Eastern North Carolina, where he was used to the agriculture land, the kind of jobs that he was accustomed to seeing around here. And we've been here since then.
All right, great. Awesome. And so I want to get into your journey as a software engineer, but because are you currently under DACA?
Yeah, right now I have DACA. I've had it since almost its inception. I waited until 2013 to send in my application. And so I sent it in right before I can't remember how many months, but before I turned 18. And, I got it later in 2013, as I was kind of going into this storyline of going to college that kind of just happened to work out, thankfully, to
Yeah.
scholars.
Right. Yeah. So tell us the challenges that you faced pursuing your career, right? I was software engineer, like just getting into the tech industry in general, was that initially something that you always wanted to get into, or was it something that kind of progressed as you pursued higher education, right?
Yeah. So really, honestly, I don't think you could have asked me when I was 17, 16, what exactly I envisioned, working in, especially given that, with people that have, immigrant parents, or even sometimes there's a lot of individuals that aren't undocumented that come here as teenagers by themselves. So they don't even have parents here, we're not exposed to the opportunities and the kind of careers and things outside of kind of the blue collar jobs that are accessible as an undocumented person in the States, right? A lot of the narratives that kind of I've heard start in either dishwashing, hotel cleaning,
Right.
Manufacturing. My parents are still in manufacturing to this day. And so those kinds of jobs are what I envision as a potential future, right? Seeing my parents go to it, and I was proud of the work they do, still proud of what they do, and all other people that have to, sustain, the I'm blanking on the word, but they're working those jobs that are necessary for the world to continue going around. But
Yeah.
that's what I envisioned. And so when I was thinking about college and what that looked like,
Yeah.
these big words were like, do you want to be an engineer? Do you want to be a scientist? Do you want to be a doctor, a lawyer? And, the immigrant dream has fascinated around this idea of doctor, lawyer, there's like a
Engineers
big
or
engineers. It's
yeah.
just, and even them talking about it, it's just this fascination that they say, like, a lot of career opportunity, a lot of money,
Yeah.
stable, secure. And to me, I was like, well, that sounds cool. I'd love to be secure and financially stable in the future. And so I started thinking around this idea of engineering, but really not knowing what it meant. It's just, there's kind of this idea in your head. And I read about, some fiction books that talk about people being engineers, architects, and you don't know until you really do it. And even now to today, I will still say that as long as you're exposed to different things that fascinate you, like, you can pursue that as a career. It doesn't have to be limited to the scope of what we think about it. But yeah, so 17-year-old me was just thinking of going to some kind of education form. At the time, being fully undocumented, was that I might go back to Mexico and pursue education there, with my dad helping me, sustain myself there while he was still here, and maybe potentially coming back with a student visa. Trajectory didn't end up changing, but my mind was set on something in engineering because I like math and science. I didn't know what.
Gotcha.
But that's what it was transpiring into, and eventually just several connections and in my timeline ended up leading me specifically towards software engineering.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's funny how some things just kind of end up in front of you, right? As like you progress through life, the universe just kind of like guides you in a certain path. But I want to talk about the funding aspect for, like, your college education. It's one that we often struggle, right? It's one of those like barriers that we have to overcome as well. How did you fund like your college education? As a, if you don't mind sharing any resources as well that you have, someone else that might be in the same shoes that you were back then.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, one of the biggest benefits, I think, is the opportunity that I see now that wasn't significantly available then, is that with DACA, I personally feel this privilege of being able to be outspoken with my entire journey as much as possible without, putting some of my family members at risk. But beyond that, like the research I touch and find, I think is super helpful to anyone that's listening and might know a resource. Sometimes you might think, why should I share about this? I'm sure other people know about it, but it's extremely helpful that even if you're sharing a link, to this day, my social media accounts have now become more of a way for like a loudspeaker to share about opportunities, highlight things that I've come across, and not a ton about my personal like life day to day, but more about how can we uplift these opportunities and resources for people. Because in 2012, when I was looking, I honestly had already given up on this idea of going to college, because there was a challenge for one at that time that being undocumented, there was a lot of limitations for some universities that already immediately bar you from going at all. There's some public universities, I believe, in Georgia that maybe still to this day have regulations around who can attend, how you
Yeah.
have to, your status, and so that was a big hurdle that I had to overcome. And sometimes I would tell someone, I am undocumented, and they'd be like, "Oh, I don't know how to talk to you," and they would be like, guidance counselors at these universities, and they were like, "Well, I don't know what to tell you." And funny enough, even where I ended up enrolling at UNC Charlotte, I ended up enrolling as an international student. So it wasn't, they
Oh,
don't have
wow.
this label of saying, he's a resident, but he's not a citizen. So I ended up being classified as an international student, which I thought was funny, but
Wow.
obviously,
Would you have to pay like out of state fees though? I mean, even
yeah,
I guess if you're under scholarship, it's a great thing to have like to have that scholarship, right, to fall back on. But yeah, you would be considered like out of state, right? And then
yeah.
that's more money then.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
significantly more money. I mean, every semester that I saw the scholarship make the payment, I was just like, that's crazy. For
Yeah.
the cost that they're paying for me, even though it's fortunate to have a scholarship, and such a supportive one as Golden Door Scholars, it still limits the amount of help they can disperse among students. Right? I
Yeah.
was carrying the weight of essentially, in-state tuition for North Carolina versus out-of-state tuition almost ends up being 3 to 4 times as much
Wow.
more. And so, you just think about how that could potentially help that many more students instead of having it to dedicate it to one person.
Mm.
I am super grateful that they did. But yeah, so kind of to your question of the resources and what I use, primarily I got lucky that this scholarship was actually started and funded by Rick Elias, CEO of Red Ventures now and then as well. And he started this idea both because, as a way to give back to community, but also DACA had just been announced in June or July of 2012. I forget the month now. And with that announcement, they saw a little bit more of a possible future for undocumented students that were pursuing higher education to actually get hired, because DACA, not only, in the name itself, deferred action for childhood arrivals, allows me to have this idea of deferred action on deportation, but it would also grant me a social security number,
Right.
work authorization, and through the social security number for North Carolina specifically, because I know there's other states that now offer what's known as just driving privileges, but in North
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, you have to have a social and some way of identification to get that driver's license for North Carolina, and so that allowed me to get a driver's license as well in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And so it opened up many doors. And so they also saw the opportunity of helping students not only get higher education, but also be employable at the end, because that's one of the biggest challenges being undocumented nowadays, with I-9 verification,
Mm-hmm.
and E-Verify and all these, things that are in place for governmental reasons. It bars a lot of people from being able to work, on paper. And so that's a lot of limitations on the workforce pool that we can have with the
Yeah.
amount of people that come here and want to work, want to sustain their lives, wants to help their family, but on paper they can't, legally work. So it's unfortunate, but DACA opened those doors, and so Golden Door Scholars, I managed to get a full ride scholarship at the time. It was opened up in 2012 for an application pool. I think over 500 people applied.
Mm-hmm.
I was extremely blessed and lucky to kind of make the trajectory to the end of the final round. And I was one of the 13 scholars that were selected that year for that first
Wow.
year. And, got a full ride scholarship to a school, that ended up accepting me, UNC Charlotte. There were several other schools that were on the map as well, but not many offering an engineering degree
Yeah.
specifically. And so UNC Charlotte just managed to work out. And another way that I also used to fund my education there, because I think even with a full ride scholarship, a lot of people forget that there's day-to-day expenses. There's, I want to go get a
Yeah.
burger, that costs money. If the scholarship
I mean,
doesn't pay
gas
for it,
money, right? If you're
gas
commuting
money,
too, like it's all.
visiting my family, transportation, and they live in Eastern North Carolina. Charlotte's, getting closest to the west side. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a 3.5 hour drive. And if I wanted to go visit them, for one, I didn't have a car my first semester, so I depended on rides and people getting me, 3/4 of the way back home.
Yeah.
And so that was super helpful. But I wanted to compensate people that gave me rides with money, and my parents were doing their best they could to help and continue to support me with the means they were limited to, that they had access to. But I got a job at the university because, again, part of DACA was that I am now, able to legally work on
Yeah.
paper. And I got a job as a resident advisor on campus and did that for 2 years. And for one, that helped to reduce the cost the scholarship was paying for, because now my room and board was paid for by working this job, and I would get a $200 stipend. I
Wow.
believe every 2 weeks.
That's really smart. That's a great that's some great advice as well. I never thought about even though it's like it's a pretty like it makes sense, right? Like working at your like applying for a job at university kind of it cuts down like your commute as well.
Yeah.
Even if it's like a little bit later, but like that's a great tip that I haven't heard like someone mention that before, like see apply for jobs on campuses and yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things is also helped me network with so many people that were on campus that I traditionally would not have met,
Mm,
being in my single major. And so that created opportunities where I later started working another campus job that was through the Leadership and Development Center on campus. And we were essentially doing like peer-led presentations on time management, emotional intelligence, personality like assessments, and that helped me develop
mm,
some public speaking skills throughout my career. And so now it makes it significantly easier having had practices like that, where it's a safe space, easy crowd to kind of work with, being peers in the same
yeah.
kind of level of life. And now it helps me whenever I want to do a presentation at work, where I already have kind of built up a little bit of those skills, and it's not as high
Right.
pressured environment to learn as it was back then. So it opens up so many opportunities. And I would encourage, if you do have the opportunity to have work authorization, explore campus opportunities first. And if you're fully undocumented, some of the avenues of getting educational stipends is also another way to get some income while you're in school, by doing research programs, apprenticeships, fellowships, because those can be passed on as an educational stipend.
Mm.
That to my knowledge, I think is allowable as kind of more of an education avenue than an official like work employment.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great route to take as well. And then speaking of like the work environment, how was your experience coming out of college and being thrown into the adult world, right? Like the working environment and kicking off your career, like kickstarting it. Did you do any like college fairs or like internships that like was that something that you had to go out of your way to go to, or was that made like available to you as a resource from the college?
So it was a significant resource that was usually always kind of in some way or another put in some kind of marketing on campus of, go to the
Mm-hmm.
career center, go to the career center. And, one of the biggest things I think as people that don't have someone telling them about these opportunities as a first generation college student, as a first generation, a lot of things, you aren't aware about these things. And you also don't know, once you do become aware of them, how do you use them? How do you
Yeah.
show up and ask for questions about career stuff? What are you going to ask them? And so
Yeah.
half the battle was figuring that out. And while the resources were there, I think I went my freshman year because I was curious. I was like, I have a resume from high school that I made just to submit to all these college essays and applications that some required. And I went there and, wanted feedback. And sure enough, that's one of the easiest way to get introduced to the career center is just taking in a resume, even if it's not necessarily, the most articulate or the best kind of put together. Their job is there to help you walk through that, set it up, change it up. And they know what is getting people hired, right? But going
Right.
in as a freshman, they actually told me like, this is great. We're glad you're reaching out. As a freshman, obviously it's going to be a little bit of a little time before you are, we're pitching you as a candidate for these internships, for these
Oh, you went
opportunities.
in as a freshman.
Yeah, I went to the career center as a freshman. I
Look
was
at
like,
you. Wow.
so I was just like, because I kept getting told like the career center. I was like,
Yeah.
what do they do? And so I went in with a resume. I'm glad I
Mm.
did. Obviously, that formed a connection with one of the counselors there. And so I just kept coming back every year and asking like, what should I be doing? What am I supposed to do? And really,
Wow.
I made that out of state tuition expenses. I put those to work. So
Hey, you got to get the most out of it, right?
yeah. And so that significantly helped. I'd encourage anyone to make sure you're checking out Career Center. Feel free to ask them like, what should I be asking you? Like, what are other students asking
Yeah.
you? That's the best way to learn. Seeing what your peers are doing and seeing what they're not doing, right? Obviously, anything is information is good information. I was lucky enough, again, that was supported through Golden Door Scholars, and the executive director now of this Road to Hire program that encompasses Golden Door Scholars. She was really involved, continues to be involved, but was more. There was a smaller pool of Golden Door Scholars, so it was easier to connect with each one of us directly to her at the time. Okay. And she would ask us individually, what are your plans for the summer, as we were going through sophomore, junior year. And my sophomore year, I think I actually went, or no, my freshman semester, I just went back, or freshman summer after doing freshman year, I went back home and worked with my dad at the company that he's working at, manufacturing kayaks. Oh, okay. And I just worked there for the summer. And, the next year she was asking me again, and I was like, well, I assumed I was going to do the same thing. And she said, no, we got to get some like professional experience in something that you want to do. And, I told her, well, I liked working with computers back home when I was in high school. I learned to kind of do a little bit of IT support, which was like just how to connect to a Wi-Fi, how to set up Wi-Fi, how to connect a printer. And I helped a couple of people in my, my community at the time back home there do that. And they would give me like $20 in exchange for, spending an hour with them, trying to help them with their tech issues. And that taught me a lot of just kind of ideating what a business looks like. And so I was like, well, maybe like business, maybe IT stuff. And she was like, well, maybe we can get you an internship at Red Ventures in the IT department. And so sure enough, I ended up getting an internship there, thankfully. With that connection, I networked with the person that was essentially leading the IT department for the company at the time. I came back for another summer the next year and continued to go on that avenue. And as I was doing that, I realized that I wanted to do a little bit more besides just tech support, because I wanted to stretch my capabilities, understand more, and the more and more
challenge yourself.
Yeah, and I kept hearing about computer science, and I took one course in programming, and the thing that pushed me away really was this idea that I'd be in the computer looking at a screen for that one semicolon that escaped,
Oh, gosh.
And I was like, that sounds miserable. Why would anyone want to do that? And so that was the only course I took. And I abandoned the idea and went, I was going for a mechanical engineering degree. That didn't work out because I realized 3 years in that physics was not for me. It was hard. It was challenging. And some people, while it was hard for them, they were enjoying it. And I was just like, no, this is just hard. Like, I'm not enjoying this one bit. And so again, that kind of nudged me back into like, well, let me consider something else. Because I'd had 3 or 8 semesters at the point of some prerequisites in mathematics for engineering. I decided in my junior year, I was just going to finish up a math major with a computer engineering minor. And sure enough, the moment I started taking computer classes, I just saw my interests spike up comparatively to working in mechanical engineering. And so I wish I'd started with that, but again,
you kind of, it sounds like you kind of just like cycled through a lot of different types of like kind of within the same ballpark, but like different types of classes till that computer one was just kind of hit, right? Like, so I feel like that's something like as well that, that's part of the college experience is make sure you also get out of your comfort zone, even if you maybe not enjoy doing a particular class. Well, at least you can cross that out, right? Yeah, and then one will like stick, kind of like with what happened with you.
Yeah, an actual metaphor that I've started kind of using as an analogy is, imagine what it felt like when we were little kids playing in the playground. We'd be on the swing set for 5 minutes. We'd run over to the slides for another 10 minutes. And then we get bored of the slides. And we realized that the swing set was really where we enjoyed jumping off of the swing at the time. And so we stick with it a little bit more. We get really good at doing like backflips off the swing set. And, one day you're like, well, I've done that. What's next? And I relate life to that, because that's what it should be about. Even in college for me, 2 years in, I realized physics wasn't going to be something that I would love. It was getting, to a point where I was okay getting by, but it wasn't calling my name. And so I went over to the slides and gave out math a shot, right? And I realized that math wasn't necessarily my direct passion. I was, good and could get by as well through it, had decent grades, but computers really was always there. And so I was like, you know what, let me go explore the basketball court, in this analogy that I'm kind of coming up with.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of life, keeping that curiosity and really letting your interests kind of guide your path. And ideally, the world would work that way, where people could do what their passion is, what their love is of life, right? And unfortunately, because a lot of the kind of, you have to make money, capitalism priorities of making sure you have enough, that it kind of pushes you and forces you to some scenarios where you can't necessarily do what you love and get paid well. But at least finding something that you're good at and looking at it from an angle where it's not necessarily, I'm a software developer. While I enjoy coding out apps, coding out things, I think I'd love to do it in the nonprofit space where I'm helping transform nonprofits to be more efficient. But, the money isn't necessarily there. And a lot of organizations require funding, donations. And so, it's a hit or miss some years with different orgs. So because I can't do that directly, I do work on the side and try to volunteer my time and help organizations with the aspect of their nonprofit. But I know my priority has to go back to, how to make a living where I can hit my financial aspirational goals, but still know that I'm giving back in some way or another.
Yeah, well put. I couldn't have said that myself better. One things I aspire to do is like do what I love, but support myself while doing it too, because obviously that's important. But I think that's what we all strive for, is just doing what we love. While I think personally, and you and I both are similar in that aspect, giving back to our community, right? And I feel a lot of dreamers and undocumented folks are similar and can relate to that aspect of, we all want to give back to the community in one way or another because we know that struggle.
Yeah.
So I love that you mentioned that as well. And for someone that's trying to get into coding, is college like the only way now, with like only the resources? And I just want to get like your opinion as well with boot camps and self-taught as well, like what your opinions are. Maybe we can get some like pros and cons of going to college, of these coding boot camps and self-taught through like YouTube and resources, right? You're listening to the Leo Podcast. I'm Kevin Munoz. This ad break is brought to you by yours truly. If you enjoy the show and are looking to further show your support, and if you already haven't done so, then head on over to patreon.com/LatinaMericaneo or my website, latinamericaneo.org, to join the growing Leo Podcast community and receive numerous benefits and bonus content for supporting your favorite podcast, because the learning doesn't stop with this episode. There's also some awesome merch on my website, everything from shirts to coffee mugs and tote bags. All info will be at the bottom of the show notes. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Yeah, for sure. Tying back into how I did get into software development, it goes a little bit into the internship I had, where I started at Red Ventures full-time right out of college, still in IT support. And, I did my best to do my job well, get good at, finding and troubleshooting problems, making sure that people were coming, to the help desk and getting the help they needed. And also exploring those technical challenges, like how can we optimize? How can we, strive for improvement in ways that we could? But my ultimate goal was that Red Ventures actually offers an internal tech academy, which is essentially a boot camp mirror off of Road to Hire, which is also another opportunity for several people that are young and between the ages of 18 and 25 as of this year is the qualifications to do the boot camp program. But they had a mirror essentially of that boot camp. And so I did that course in 2018 from May to the end of October. And so my experience was actually not from college, where I took a couple programming classes, but I was not ready coming out of college to really jump into a software engineering role. But that opportunity gave me the chance to learn through a curriculum that they had put together through Udemy videos, videos on Pluralsight, videos on Team Treehouse.
Wow.
And some videos here and there that just are available online. And, that's where my knowledge comes from, and in my foundation of getting into coding. And I think it was, for one, it's self-discipline of teaching yourself something that way. It is hard for anyone. I alluded to my several attempts at trying to learn guitar. I don't keep up with it. I went straight for 2 months on one thing. I was getting to the point where I could finally move my fingers in a way that made sense, but then I just stopped. And so it takes a lot. And so I appreciate that program was available, because that's what held me accountable to keep at it, push myself, and finally graduated and started as an associate engineer. 3 years ago this fall. and it's fascinating what I've been able to accomplish. But I do think that a lot of what's helped me, I'd say, accelerate my career growth is both a mixture of the opportunities that I found at Red Ventures, but also the way that I keep that curiosity first and foremost. And for anything with relating to coding and app development, you have to have some kind of curiosity to understand what you're coding out. For one, why do you want to code something out? And two, why would you do it in the way that you're trying to code it out, right? So I think that's the first like soft skill that I'd say. It doesn't even, it's not really technical. It's just a matter of having that curiosity. Do you want to understand it? Are you curious about it enough to pursue it? So having that in mind, I personally, my opinion is that if you have the opportunity to get a computer science degree, at little to no cost, you have scholarships, you have a way to get that bachelor's degree, I'd say go for it. 100% go for that bachelor's degree. If you are in a spot where you can't pay for college, there's a boot camp available, and the boot camp will cost you less money than having to go through a 4-year degree. Do the boot camp. Obviously make sure you do your homework on the boot camp and make sure that you understand that it is a worthwhile boot camp. One of the biggest pros I'd say that to make sure is that the boot camp not only is giving you a curriculum, but is providing support for you after the fact that you complete the boot camp to get into a job.
Right. That they introduce you to like their networks as well, right?
Yeah. Essentially, the biggest way of kind of getting some opportunities nowadays, and if I knew this knowledge back then, I would tell myself each time of like, it's about what you know, but it's also about who you know. And that doesn't make sense until you start meeting with people, understanding, oh, you work in this space, what do you do? And just being curious again about the roles. And, that conversation might be 2 years ago, but now, say if I were to be looking for an opportunity, my first thought was like, well, let me look at what other people are doing. What space are they in? Is it cool tech? Is it appealing to me? And if it is, I'll call them up and ask them like, how are you liking it? What don't you like? And next thing you know, you might have an opportunity that just kind of, the next thing they might tell you is like, hey, we're actually hiring for X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, that's true.
And, that's one of the best ways. And really going back to an early question about career fairs, while I did go to some career fairs, I don't know that I utilized it to my advantage because I didn't know, again, that networking is really the primary goal of this, of you meeting recruiters. It's not necessarily about you going there and they're going to offer you an opportunity in the spot, right? To someone that isn't aware at the time. That's what I thought it was.
That's what I always thought it was too. When I heard of it, I was like, maybe I show up and they'll be like, you're hired.
yeah. And that's what I expected. So by the end, I was always like demoralized. I was like, dang it, nobody offered me a job.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
But it was really the start. And, if I knew that, then I would like follow it up with the recruiter, tell them simple, like, thanks for coming to the career fair. The recruiter goes through so many people that's doing something like that stands out of you just saying like, I really enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to the application process if you're interested in it. Yourself to do that. But otherwise, just saying a thank you, just, being human beings, I think at the core is just being nice to one another, expressing gratitude where it's needed, and showing that respect of, this is a mutual acquaintance, you need a resource, because it is that, right? It's a matter that you're bringing a skill set to the table. They're going to compensate you for it. And so just saying, it was great to meet you. If our, paths end up together, then great. If not, I'll keep you in mind for any other things that happen.
What is your, what is your experience? Or I guess you kind of mentioned that the networking part would be the important part, but I would say like, what's your experience with like recruiters or companies hiring, like seeing a like coding boot camp, they give you like they're graduating, what's it called, that when you they give you like their own degree, right?
Certification.
Yeah, the certification. Yeah, I don't know why I blanked out on that, but like, what's your like, do you think these companies are seeing like a certification from a coding boot camp any different than like someone with a college degree? Or again, it goes back to like networking. Like if the coding boot camp introduces you to like companies, then it doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah. So it'll be a mix. And a part of that is because boot camps are still trying to make a name for themselves as well as it stands.
Yeah.
Like the one example that I can give you concretely is as Road to Hire has grown, it's now formed partnerships where their students that graduate their program after their capstone, after their curriculum, get placed at different companies like Bank of America, Novant, Red Ventures. And so Road to Hire is creating this brand of itself as, as their students are successful and continue going on to these companies where next year or 3 years from now, where maybe Road to Hire has a graduate that went somewhere else, and none of these companies had ever like interacted with them through the program itself. But they come back and they see Road to Hire on their resume as, you know, something that's on their name. And Bank of America now has, you know, maybe a Road to Hire alumni as a director there.
Right.
You know, now that he's Road to Hire, yeah, I know what the caliber of people from this boot camp are coming in with. And so I think that's going to develop. Obviously, it's also part of the marketing and the branding and you know, boot camps prioritizing quality over quantity, right? You know, I think once we start, there's going to be different levels of, I think, what engineers are going to transition to. We're going to need, you know, all myriads of levels down to the support level, all the way to people that are doing like data science, where even I able to comprehend a little bit more of the concepts in computer science that, you know, would probably have benefited me from a computer science degree. But at the same time, in my day-to-day, I haven't had immediate need for these concepts at a academic level. You know, there's cutting edge academia happening in the space that I don't work in that space. And so I don't need to know a lot of that. I need to know more about infrastructure on the internet. How do we spin up a website? How do we optimize a web application? So those things are more on my day-to-day that I think, again, leads back to knowing that in anything in life, I think, you know, unless you're doing a job that is kind of routine and, you know, you can narrow down the process to, you know, a set of instructions, which coding is a set of instructions. But if you can't narrow it down to a set of instructions, it's going to be impossible for you to know everything that's immediately available for that role. And so I associate, you know, software engineering. You're going to know what's immediately in front of you every day. You might jump into a different role and you won't know what's happening. And that's okay. You know, you have to give yourself grace that it's so big. As long as you're understanding concepts of how computers work, how logic processes, you know, take it one day at a time and you'll learn. And that's really the biggest need I've seen in the space. While there's bigger companies that, you know, we know all the name brand companies that are looking for engineers that know cutting edge academia to optimize their algorithms. You know, search engines need to optimize to get the answer 5 seconds ago, right? That's different. I think, you know, for stuff like that, you'll have to prioritize a different set of skills. But if you're looking at helping a lot of nonprofits and organizations like that, it comes down back to, you know, how do we get them on the internet? How do we get them on websites? How do we build their presence on a website? So it's different skills that we're going to need as we transition more and more into tech.
All right. Okay. And that kind of leads me into also like, what are some like myths about getting into the tech industry? Like, is it required to have like a math degree, right? You know, like what is some of the things that you've heard that you're just like, well, that's not necessarily true, right?
Yeah. So again, it'll be a myriad of experiences, and I'll talk to mine specifically of kind of going back to the story of that semicolon search. Like that can very well happen. It probably won't go on for hours because a lot of the tools that we use, you know, do guide us in the direction where those errors are easier to find. But when you do have an issue like that, you know, you could spend 2 hours and at the end of the day, it might be because you set something to the wrong value. But that, I think it's a myth of saying that you're not going to be collaborating with people, that you're going to be this hacker in the basement, you know, tucked away. And while it might feel like that sometimes when you're really deep in the problem, most of the times as I go higher up in the ladder of kind of knowing the tech world, it's more about strategizing and like, do we really want to use this tool over that tool? Should we build this tool? Should we just use one that already exists? It's more about, you know, putting pieces together. And I think a rumor of it is like to think about it like Legos and like puzzle pieces. And in a way it is, and in a way it isn't, but it is about just kind of putting pieces together. And just like life, you know, you're putting a house, you're putting a car, and it becomes this home, right? And coding in a way is that same way, where I think math degree that I have has benefited maybe simply in how hard of a time I had figuring out critical thinking problems in mathematics. I don't use formulas that are mathematical in my day-to-day. I do tend to think about, you know, if I did, what would it look like? And, you know, there's different, probably more in like science and chemistry and machine learning and algorithms. I probably use it more. But again, my strength has been more of so becoming kind of this generalist of, you know, at this point, I've used over 5 different backend languages. I've done a lot of front-end work that is kind of what people see. There's different frameworks, but at the end of the day, we're trying to accomplish something similar in website and web application design that how do we engage a customer? How do we engage a volunteer for these nonprofits that, that's another mindset I have to put myself into. Like, how do we get the information that someone needs up front and ready? And what kind of information can we create from all these resources, from the government resources, from I'm working with a project on voting resources. And so my challenge is, how can I make that these tools for registering someone to vote are accessible, are easy to use. And so there's different things that you have to consider. And so it's more strategizing and talking with people, that I think is a myth, that you'll be in a basement not talking to anyone.
That's very true. And back to your Lego point, you said it was like not necessarily like Legos, but you know what I immediately thought of was, like, I think, doesn't Lego have like a starter kit or something where like you can program like a robots, right? Can't you like code them, and like, I don't know why, but that's immediately what I thought about when you mentioned that. And I was like, that's also a pretty cool like thing that
It is.
I feel like I would buy my kid. I'd buy myself, I might have to buy that like myself. Like,
I saw a video recently where they were using Legos to create this little robotic car to essentially cross like a gap between two tables. And so the cool thing about Legos in that way that they use them was that you can immediately change the design of your car, and you're programming it to, go in a straight line, but you're iterating, and really the whole concept of technology is that we need to iterate every time. It's not going to be perfect. And that way you don't enter in this paralysis of trying to make the perfect app, but rather you get an app, you serve it as a minimum viable product known as an MVP. And from there, you iterate, you continue to build up on it. And so Legos definitely does lend itself to be able to do something, a little project like that. And, other thing that people get into is Raspberry Pis, which is this little board that you can kind of program to do different things. It's like a mini computer in a way, but there's several fun projects that, like you said, I don't think I'm gonna wait until I have kids. I'm gonna start buying little
That's
games.
what I'm saying. Like, I might have to buy it for myself, because I'm intrigued by the tech industry, and I'm like, man, I should. I try to teach myself some things, and it's just the discipline is hard when there's a lot of distractions. But maybe I'll get back to, hey, maybe you'll see me in that coding boot camp that you guys offer. But another thing I want to focus on is the perks, right? Like, what do you think are some great perks of not only generally, right, going into the tech industry, but specifically as like dreamers and people in the Latinx community, like why we should start looking more into pursuing careers in the tech industry?
Yeah. So there's a great article that I think we spoke about that was shared about, 5 main reasons why undocu and DACA individuals need to pursue a career in tech. And I don't remember each and every single point, but just to me at a personal level as to why, I was drawn to it really when I was in IT. And one thing that kept coming back to me is, like, I have DACA for 2 years. I don't know what's going to happen, especially as we went through a very, and continue to go through a very turbulent time with the security around DACA, is that it's a temporal thing. And so that, for one, I had to go through a personal mental health, kind of reassuring myself that that wasn't what I needed to hold myself to every time, because it would freak me out to think, I'm going to run out after 2 years, it's over. Yeah. I kept pressuring myself to do more and more and more. And while that hope, catalyzed a lot of what I've done, it was not sustainable. And I think it's a matter of being real with ourselves and realizing that if we're going to do something, we need to understand that, we have to do it in a sustainable manner. And one of the things that I've taken with that is, with that pressure, it did lead me to think, if I do get, deported or I lose DACA, how can I continue to work, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that makes sense for my family, getting that financial security. And what clicked in my head was, if I can get into development, software development, all I need is a computer and an internet connection. And that's, widely available, not as much, obviously, I think in developing countries and a lot of rural areas and in developed locations. Even I grew up in a very rural area of North Carolina that we only have satellite to this day, even though we're like 10 minutes from town. It's so much country that, we don't have an immediate DSL provider. Wow. So it's insane that still is, the case in today's society, as we're pursuing technology like 5G and satellite internet that's more enhanced, I hope that is lessened, and so it's more accessible to people. But I think, what I wanted to say with that is internet connection and a computer, you can work from anywhere. So that brought me to this idea of like, if I do get deported, I can still work from Mexico. I can still work, and maybe because it's, I don't know if you know this norteña song, but like Jaula de Oro, like a golden cage is really what it is, where I love the US for what the opportunity is giving me. But obviously that lack of being able to travel freely, sometimes I wonder, some friends that I know closely have made this leap of faith of leaving the US and, foregoing being here and a lot of family, which is a hard decision, but then they have access to travel other places. And so that was my concept, right? Of if I get deported, I break out of this golden cage and potentially can go work as a digital nomad is, huge buzzword. Just look up digital nomad. You'll have so many hits,
right?
Of how to live, in a way that's probably more luxurious, because money as a software developer can sometimes carry you a little bit further in countries that are not as expensive, right?
I was gonna say, especially in other countries where the dollar just goes a long way. Just, yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the series right now on Apple TV, it's called Acapulco. It's with Eugenio Derbez, and he's it's hilarious. I love it.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, you got to check it out. And at one point, he talks about the dollar because he's in Mexico, and he opens up a bottle of beer that's not a cork tap, and so he opens it up with a little trick with like a folded up dollar bill, and his joke was like, though, you can only do that in Mexico because the dollar is stronger in Mexico. And I was like, well, facts.
That's funny. I'm gonna have to watch that. That's hilarious.
It's a great show. And just like you said, the dollar will take you that much further in scenarios. And there's so many big companies that require engineers functioning out of other locations. I've recently, my company that I am in now, Level, they actually have a Monterrey, Mexico office. And, I've also been looking more at Monterrey, and it's like a tech hub as well, developing in Mexico, where there's presence of Microsoft, there's presence of other big name brand companies, and some not as well known, but also offering tech jobs. And some of them offer like work visas for some of our employees in the past, and maybe other organizations offer the same. And so there's just a myriad of opportunities, I think, in the tech space that will continue to become almost like a norm, because technology is everywhere, and it needs to be in some places where it's not already. So there's a lot of niche spaces that technology will be introduced to that I hope is used for good, like these nonprofits that will be empowered much further by having the technology needed to get them to the next level up. Yeah,
no, definitely. And to your point of like, it doesn't surprise me that much either that your company opened one in Mexico. Like I love finance and like doing all that research and investments and stuff. And so many companies are just, tapping into Latin American like markets, and putting a lot of money into investing in it, that it's like, if people pay attention to like what types of companies are doing it and what type of jobs they're creating, like you can get creative as well. Like I'll work with this company, and like you could be in Mexico working from them. Right. You know what I mean? Like you said, like they offer visas and stuff.
Yeah, I have coworkers in Brazil, in Ecuador, and all through South America as well. And it's just fascinating to see that, because I think, for one, I think we're very US centric, being the US, that we forget to think about all the things that are happening beyond our scope that we have in our day to day. But yeah, things are moving. One of the countries that I'm fascinated with is Japan, with the work that they're doing over there in design, video games, that the animation, and also just looking at videos of the city Tokyo. It's just fascinating to see.
I would love to go there one day.
Yeah,
when we can travel, man.
Yeah. But all that said, that I think honestly technology, and I think some people confuse it, where technology isn't just about the code. There's so many other supporting roles in technology, like project management, business analyst, data analyst. It's a myriad of things that can happen in day to day. So I definitely encourage anyone to be open to it. Even like translation services, we need to translate application, content to different languages available in the States and in the other countries that we're trying to expand to.
Yeah, especially if you're a native speaker, right? Often, like I feel the the translation that's used is not it's not off. It's just
Yep.
like a Google translation, right? It's not like a native speaker translation that would actually uh be beneficial to a
Yes.
lot of companies. It's a big demand, I would say.
Yeah.
um and a lot of things also I feel like that people often forget is just like, I mean, if we also mentioned it in our previous talk, where like some people, if you're interested in uh like climate change and like energy, right, and addressing inequities, like
Yes.
getting into the tech industry one is probably is a big way to form projects that will not only help like where like in the United States, but also outside the United States, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think when I think about technology, as I've gained, some experience in the area, that I think is, if there's anything you want to do, the huge benefit of finding how you can enhance your workflow with technology is that scalability, right? That
Yeah.
no longer will you be only tackling a problem in one area. While it's great to optimize for, say we're wanting to solve climate, natural disasters are happening on the coast of North Carolina, right? And while we can focus on that area, the cool thing about tech is like, okay, we fixed it. How do we expand that to now take over the entire eastern coast? And
Mm-hmm.
technology can empower us to pursue that much quicker than if we were to put 100 people together to think through it. We can set up data science that ends up doing several algorithms and multiplying all these crazy numbers that I'm not familiar with, but to getting to a better solution quicker and trying so many prototypes much more efficiently. And so even in like fitness, we see all these fitness apps, and we also see
Yeah.
nutrition apps coming out, and tech can power so many things that the only ask that I have of big corporations is really just remember to be ethical. Remember to think
Mm-hmm.
through how you're impacting the people that are going to be your consumers, the people that are going to read your content, because that's one thing that I think the tech industry can do significantly better on as a whole. Just being thoughtful and really thinking, the day of tomorrow when you're making an app, think back and say, how would I feel if my nephew, my niece, my dad, my mom, myself, how would I feel if I interact with this? And the way that we're collecting data, we're doing all these different evaluations of people, and just think through those things, because climate space is one of the big ones that will be significantly I think empowered by the technology used for it, but we could also mess it up poorly by helping it with tech, and make it potentially worse, both with like the
Yeah.
energy impacts, that if we make an app that is helping mitigate natural disasters but is using tons and tons of carbon emissions to just get there, it's like, well, we're not really hoping improve the situation. We're
Yeah.
just putting a band-aid on it. And I think that's one of the things that we can't continue doing. We can't put a band-aid on everything. We have to really be thoughtful and purposeful with a lot of our actions.
Mm, well said. And also notice that on your website, you note that like in your recent years, right, you become much more vocal immigrant on immigrant rights. And I just wanted to get like your take on uh maybe some projects that you've been involved in, and as well as like what's your motivation, like in recent years that you started to get more into that.
Yeah, one of the closest to my heart is the first project I started on in 2019, my undoculife.com. It was really about uplifting people's voices, because I think there are opportunities that have put me in a place where I can be vocal, and people will hear me and listen, and listen to my narrative, and that's been such an empowering thing to do, to be able to share my narrative for good. But there's millions and thousands of other people that have narratives just as compelling, and they just need the platform for it. And so that was one of my first like kind of immigrant rights opportunities, to essentially kind of bring us out of the shadows even further, to creating a platform that doesn't have an agenda, because a lot of times that we do get the platform, it's pushed on an agenda specifically towards some bill or some change that we're trying to ask for. And I know that's needed, necessary work, but I wanted to provide a space where there was no agenda. It was free of judgment, free of, it's your platform, use it as you need it. And so that's been a passion project I've been doing it's helped me both with my coding experience and also with my content. And I never thought about how much editing goes into content. So I appreciate any content provider and any medium that is provided. That it's a lot of work. So thank you as well for the work you're going to do here.
Of course, yeah.
And outside of that, the other projects I've done is just kind of voting resource access with DACA Action, El Pueblo, organizations in North Carolina, and several other grassroots organizations that, you know, we're trying to enhance that process, because for righteous and just change, we need to empower the people that must control where our direction in politics heads. You know, the Constitution is officially started with, you know, we the people, and a lot of the times I think we've kind of lost the grounding for that. I think it's we the few people sometimes, and so we need to get back
a lot
to
of times.
we need we as a whole, regardless of, you know, where you stand on the spectrum of your political affiliation. We definitely need to all have a system that works for everyone to get to the solutions that are best for the globe and, you know, for our people. And so that ties in education equity, immigration rights. And so a lot of the work that I do kind of centers around on my passion projects that must have some component of that. And continuing forward, I think out of my employer, because I know I'm privileged to have the skill set that I have, and to also offer it as a, you know, as a contract service to whoever my employer is. You know, I think I merit some recognition to whoever it is of saying, you know, are you hearing me for the person I am? And how can we collaborate together to move this needle forward as a business, as a, you know, global business? So that's something I think I take on and just try to be thoughtful as I go my day to day to make sure, you know, the day of tomorrow, I'm not working for an organization that is, you know, oppressing some community. Regardless of the community, I think it needs to be just and equitable for all.
Yes. Oscar for president.
Need a birth certificate from the States and then we can do it.
I know, right? I looked into it, believe me. Yeah. But listen, I appreciate you coming on here and sharing all your knowledge. And, you know, it's been such an informational episode, and I myself have gotten so many takeaways from it. If there's anything else before we get into where people can reach you that you'd like to share with the audience, this is your time.
Thank you, Kevin. And more than anything, I just want to tell everyone, regardless of where you are in life, trust the process, invest in yourself, both, you know, treating yourself to that ice cream cone that you've been craving, that pizza that you want. Find support. It takes a village. And I think more than anything, as immigrants, as undocumented individuals that have had either the fortune or misfortune of not having or having a support system, it's become such a central thing of value to me that my support system is everything to me. You know, my wife, my parents, my siblings, friends, family, you know, my in-laws, and it takes a village. And I think as an immigrant individual, I see that value more so because I know that my parents left a community when they came and did the decision to come here. And it was a struggle, you know, starting from nothing, but building a community and reaching out. And it's going to take vulnerability from both sides to create that community. But you know, the success that people see is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much that goes underneath in getting here. And, you know, I encourage anyone that wants to reach out for a conversation after this to do so. I'm happy to chat, also happy to share and get people connected to where they need to be, because we're here to help each other as global citizens. Yeah,
great. And where are some places people can reach you to, you know, get connected with you?
Yeah, so the first and primary one where it actually lists most of the ways that people can reach me is Oscar Romero Jorge.com. Jorge spelled Jorge. That's my portfolio website, also including a lot of my links to LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. While I'm not as active in all of them, that's definitely a way for people to reach me. My email as well, if they want to reach me at my email, it's oscarrom@gmail.com. Happy to connect in any way possible, and also reach out to Kevin on Instagram, give him some kudos, and you can reach me through that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please give it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and a follow on Spotify. It helps me tremendously in order to bring more awareness and educational resources to our community. For more information and to stay up to date with what I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram at Latinamericaneo. And if you need more information and resources, you can visit my website, latinamericaneo.org. I'm Kevin Munoz. This has been the Leo Podcast, and I'll see you next time. This podcast is not investment advice, and I am not a qualified licensed investment advisor. All information on here, including any ideas, opinions, views, predictions, forecasts, commentaries, suggestions, or stock picks expressed or implied are for informational, entertainment, or educational purposes only and should not be construed as personal investment advice. Conduct your own due diligence or consult a licensed financial advisor or broker before making any and all investment decisions. Any investments, trades, speculations, or decisions made on the basis of any information found on this podcast, expressed or implied, are committed at your own risk, financial or otherwise.